Combat sports occupy a strange space in our culture. They are raw, physical, demanding, and for a long time, they were seen as spaces where identity was supposed to be simple. You trained, you competed, you won or you lost. Everything else was noise. But sport is never just sport. It reflects the world around it, absorbs its tensions, and sometimes, when the right people come along, it helps change it. Visibility in sports like boxing, wrestling, and kickboxing carries a particular weight. These are disciplines where strength is everything, where toughness is the currency, and where the idea of who belongs has historically been very narrow. When athletes in those spaces choose to be fully seen, not just as competitors, but as whole human beings, that changes something. The 5 athletes we're going to talk about today are not just champions in their sport, they are people whose presence, whose openness, and whose refusal to be smaller than they are have made those spaces different. Not perfectly different, but meaningfully so. Let's start with someone who, by almost any measure, is the greatest female mixed martial artist of all time. Amanda Nunes grew up in Pojuca, a small city in the state of Bahia, Brazil. She started training as a teenager, driven by something that was hard to name but impossible to ignore. By the time she made it to the UFC, she was already someone who moved differently. Not just in terms of technique, but in terms of presence. There was a certainty to her that didn't come from arrogance. It came from knowing exactly who she was. And Amanda Nunes is, by any standard, extraordinary. She became the first woman in UFC history to hold titles in 2 weight classes simultaneously, featherweight and bantamweight. And she defended both. She defeated some of the most decorated fighters the sport has ever seen. Ronda Rousey, Chris Cyborg, Holly Holm, Valentina Shevchenko. The list reads like a hall of fame on its own. But what makes her story bigger than the statistics is what she brought into that octagon with her. Amanda has been open about her relationship with fellow MMA fighter Nina Ansaroff for years. The two got married in 2019, and in 2020, they welcomed a daughter together. When Amanda won her fights, and she won many, she would point to Nina in the crowd, or mention her in interviews, with the same directness she brought to everything else in her life. No hesitation, no performance of something smaller than what was true. In a sport built on projection and intimidation, there was something quietly radical about that. Here was the most dominant woman in the history of her discipline, and she was also openly, visibly, unambiguously herself. Not in spite of being a champion, while being one. For a lot of people watching, especially young women who had never seen that combination before, that meant something that no title defense could fully capture. Across the Atlantic, a different kind of history was being made, and it was happening one punch at a time. Nicola Adams grew up in Leeds, England, and fell in love with boxing as a child after watching it on television. She began training at 12. For most of her youth, women's boxing wasn't even an Olympic sport. There were no pathways, no medals, no official recognition at the highest level. She trained anyway. In 2012, at the London Olympics, women's boxing made its Olympic debut, and Nicola Adams won gold. She became the first woman in Olympic history to win a boxing gold medal, not just for Great Britain, for anyone, anywhere. She did it again in Rio in 2016. 2 Olympic gold medals, a world amateur title, undefeated throughout her entire amateur career, and then a professional career that included a world title as well. Nicola has been openly out for years. She has spoken about her relationships with women in interviews without drama or declaration, with the same matter-of-fact warmth she brings to most things. In 2019, she appeared on Strictly Come Dancing, the beloved British dance competition, and was part of the show's first same-sex pairing. She spoke about how important that felt to her, not as a statement, but as a simple reflection of who she is. There is something worth sitting with there. Nicola Adams didn't make history once. She made it repeatedly, in different arenas, in different ways. And she did it as herself, fully, without footnote. In a sport that for so long told women they didn't belong, she didn't just show up, she defined the era. Sometimes courage doesn't look like a knockout. Sometimes it looks like holding on when everything inside you is telling you to let go. Now, there's something worth pausing on before we go further. Not every athlete chooses to share every part of their life publicly. And that choice, the choice to keep certain things private, deserves just as much respect as the choice to be open. Helen Maros is one of those athletes. She became the first American woman to win an Olympic gold medal in wrestling in Rio 2016, defeating the Japanese legend Saori Yoshida, who had won 3 consecutive Olympic titles and 13 world championships before that night. It was one of the most stunning upsets in the history of the sport. And the way Maroulis won, with intelligence, with patience, with a kind of calm ferocity that caught everyone off guard, said everything about the athlete she had become. What makes her story even more remarkable is what came after. At the Tokyo Olympics, Maroulis was competing while managing the effects of a serious concussion that had threatened her career. She had spent years in recovery, rebuilding not just her athletic ability, but her mental health. She talked openly about that journey, about anxiety, about the invisible cost of elite competition, about what it meant to come back to the mat when coming back was never guaranteed. Her legacy is built on that kind of honesty, on showing that vulnerability and toughness aren't opposites, that talking about the things that hurt doesn't make you weaker. It makes you human, and in a sport that still sometimes struggles to make space for that, her voice has mattered. The fourth name in this story comes from Canada, and from the wrestling mats of the Commonwealth Games, the World Championships, and the Olympics. Erica Wiebe won gold at the 2016 Rio Olympics in the 75-kilogram freestyle wrestling category. She was dominant, methodical, and deeply prepared, the result of years building toward a single moment, and she reached it. But what's perhaps less talked about is what she did with the platform that came after. Wiebe came out publicly and has spoken openly about her relationship and her identity as a queer woman. She has been an advocate, in a quiet, consistent way, for inclusion in sport and for the normalization of LGBTQ athletes at the elite level, not through declarations, but through presence, through speaking when asked, through showing up at events, through being visible in a way that makes the next person's path a little easier to walk. In wrestling, a sport that doesn't always generate the media coverage of boxing or MMA, that visibility carries particular weight, because the athletes who might need to see it most are often the ones least likely to see it by accident. And that's where her story becomes bigger than the sport itself. From wrestling in the United States to the striking arts of Europe and beyond, the world of kickboxing has its own icons. And few are more formidable than Anisa Mexen. Born in France, raised between cultures, Mexen turned professional in a discipline that rewards explosive precision above almost everything else. She became a multi-time world champion in kickboxing and K1. Titles from organizations like the WBC, WAKO Pro, and Glory, which is the sport's most prestigious stage. She is widely considered the pound-for-pound best female striker in the world. Her technical ability is something coaches use as a teaching tool. Fast, accurate, economical. No wasted movement. Combinations that read like mathematics. And behind all of it, a work ethic that has kept her competitive at the top level for well over a decade. Mexen is also a Muslim woman who has navigated the particular complexity of representing a religion that is not always welcomed in the sporting mainstream. She has spoken about what it means to compete in the name of her family, her faith, and herself, and how those things coexist, not compete, within who she is. When you put these 5 women side by side, something emerges beyond the titles, the medals, and the highlight reels. You see a portrait of what it actually means to compete at the highest level as a woman in combat sports today. And it's far more complex, and far more human than the simple narrative of strength and victory would suggest. Some of them were open about their relationships, their identities, their love. And in being open, they made space for others. They didn't do it heroically, they just did it. And that quiet act of existing publicly and wholly is something that ripples outward in ways that are genuinely hard to measure. If this video gave you a new perspective on these athletes and the world they move in, then it did what it was supposed to do. And if you want more stories like this one, stories that go beyond the scorecards and into the real human complexity behind elite sport, then hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and make sure you ring the bell so you never miss a new video. It genuinely helps more than you know. See you in the next one!